Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this this panel, and in fact the next one today. For me, it's a very special pleasure. I'm delighted, Espen, to know that blue is your favourite colour. It's also mine. I don't know if you can gather that. And particularly last night, I came along to the reception, and when I walked in, I saw a sea of black suits, and I thought, if we're going to talk about shipping, we're going to have some blue. So that's what I'm wearing. But it has a sort of, and some red, yes. Magda did the same thing, right? It does have a little bit of green, teal kind of message going on there, so it's definitely my my jacket for the sea. Slightly more seriously, in the last year and a half, I've done quite a few events for the shipping industry, and I work with lots of different sectors in business, and my main expertise is in energy, but I work with lots of different ones as well. I would say this, I suppose, now, because as Esben also pointed out, flattery is a very good way to proceed, right? But what I have found in my work in the shipping industry so far, and I've just been dipping my toe in this water, is something that we were talking about this morning, that as well as a dedicated group of people, you also seem to have a lot of passion for the sea. And I hope that some of that passion is actually going to come out today in our discussions. So what we're here to talk about, it is, of course, carbon dioxide on this panel. Esben, you said there's no doubt that CO2 is the big one. And Kitek said the whole world will be watching IMO next year and looking for something, he said, of real substance. And next year the world will expect IMO member states to deliver. So the stakes are quite high on this one. I was also quite struck by something that Kitek said this morning as well. He talked about the hard work and devotion already happened, and he talked about miraculous collaboration. And it is going to take miraculous collaboration to make this happen, not just within the shipping industry, but across as well. So let's see if we can find any of that hard work, dedication, miraculous collaboration on this very illustrious panel today. You all know this. You know that shipping isn't covered by the Paris Agreement. You know that the world is watching. You know that the roadmap for CO2 reduction is happening. One thing that didn't really come out yet this morning, but probably will, is that one of the driving forces is, of course, the desire to avoid unilateral impositions by different regions. And that's certainly something that I imagine is going to come out today. There's a stick as well as a carrot for this. What we're going to do in this panel is we'll start off with talking about what the level of ambition should be, and then we'll go into something more about how realistically that could be achieved. Each panel member is going to start with a brief opening statement, then we'll have a conversation. I will be coming to you during the conversation, not just afterwards, so please have any questions, thoughts, ideas ready, and let's see if we can get some passion into the room. So let's start. First of all, the one thing I was going to mention about this panel is that quite conveniently, you've given me quite a lot of Johns. So we have 3 Johns. I don't know if that's typical of the shipping industry. I was going to ask Sveinung and Magda if they mind my calling them John just for the day, just to make it a bit easier. But I decided against that. So Sveinung, why don't you begin with your opening?
Thank you. Do I need to press this? No,
Yeah,
it's
no,
on. Thank you very much. Okay, 2 minutes. Let me start with some basic observations, which is of utmost importance for this discussion. In 1992, 25 years ago, the global community decided to combat climate change with the adoption of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Within that convention, there is an objective, and within the objective, there is an ambition, which is the stabilization of greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. Since then, the global greenhouse gas emissions have increased significantly. Since then, greenhouse gas emissions from international shipping have increased with more than 50%. The scientific evidence on climate change is stronger. The observed situation is pressing. I would add with 2 more basic trends on the more positive side. The solutions for emission cuts are also growing, and the willingness to take real action is more firm. Now, moving to the IMO. IMO is the only body which can establish global frameworks for emission reductions from global shipping, ensuring the needed delivery from international shipping. IMO member states have agreed to take further steps and settle that way forward in a comprehensive IMO strategy on reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from ships. My ambition for that process is to maintain and enhance the atmosphere of trust among member states in the process. My ambition is to arrive at a solid solution in time. My ambition is that the strategy will be respected and appreciated by all as the platform for further action. This brings me back to my opening point, which referred to the objective and the ambition of the United Framework Convention in 1992. Until Paris, the agreed follow-up actions, commitments, have not been sufficient in order to meet the ambition of the Convention. To conclude, I would say that we have started our work with the intention to have no loose ends, but ensure that there is a link between ambition, principles, and follow-up actions. And most importantly, that there is a link between ambition, actions, and the climate change challenge.
Thank you very much, Sveinung. So, John?
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. I'd like to pick up on what's just been said about trust and about cooperation, because I think that it's rather sterile and not productive if we kind of insist on, if you like, a confrontational approach to this issue. Shipping is a responsible industry. We're responsible people. And it is very much a people's industry still. The whole of bulk shipping, if you like, is made up of a very large number. I think it's 9,000 according to Clarkson's around the world. Medium or small-sized private shipping companies, which means that there's an, if you like, it's a proprietary entrepreneurial type of business, not a corporate business. So I am a citizen of this world. I don't want the planet to sort of disappear under the sea. I'm also a businessman, and I don't think that those two things are incompatible. In fact, I think at the end of the day, they have to be connected. We're all responsible for climate change. It's not just industries or sectors. So I want my ship to be as clean as possible. And I can adopt technologies if they're there, which is a big challenge for shipping. Challenge for shipping is that we have a fossil fuel captive industry, and there are no significant, at this stage, technological means of drastically reducing CO2 emissions and drastically reducing fuel consumption. Fuel consumption is our first cost, so we have an incentive to reduce this. And we've been doing this since the late 70s. So to finish this introduction, I just want to mention that before UNFCCC, before, if you like, global warming became as prominent as it is, and rightly, on the political agenda and for everybody, shipping had been working towards reducing its fuel consumption and therefore its emissions, because of commercial reasons, and this through the average size of vessels, which in no other transport sector can this be done, except to a certain extent it was done in aviation with jumbos, etc. But the average size of ships since the 70s until today has doubled, which means less engine stacks, less units, if you like, on the ocean to do an increasing amount of work. Also, hull forms. Whatever was the bulbous bow, for instance, technical in effect changes to ships since the 70s to reduce fuel consumption. This was, as I say, before UNFCCC, before climate change became an issue. So there's a lot there that shipping has done apart from EEDI, apart from the fact that in absolute terms since 2008, we've had a 10% reduction in CO2 from shipping, even though trade has increased. So there's a lot of things that we are already doing, and I wanted to end, sorry if we've gone over the 2 minutes, that we don't need confrontation here. We need cooperation, both at the IMO and with the powerful regional organizations like, or areas like the EU, the United States, and North America, or whatever. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Next, John.
John 2. Thank you. You can be John 3 and John 4. Anyway, I think going back to Gabrielle's opening comments, that I think we are passionate about our industry. And therefore I think it's important that our industry is understood. I think also that, I think John's right, we don't need to be confrontational, but maybe in explaining our industry and explaining where we are, maybe we have to be a little bit provocative. And that I think I'd start by saying, you've seen it on videos, you've heard it in comments this morning, shipping carries 90% of world trade. These words just trip off the tongue, and we hear that and we take it for granted. Here on this table, we represent a lot of interest. I mean, I wear about 3 hats, as was explained. I'm the ND of Teekay Shipping. We have 200 ships. We carry about 10% of the world's oil. So I put that with the 90%, and I say, well, that's quite a big role to play. So how do I want to be seen in this industry? Do I want to be seen, do I want my company to be seen as just a potential polluter? Or do I want to be seen as an organization, and our shareholders would be horrified at that thought, I can tell you. Or do I want to be seen as providing a service to the world, as a citizen of the world, as John has said, as providing a service and a major role to play in global trade? And I think we've got to start there to get it into some sort of context. I think that we're all very serious about our environmental responsibilities. I mean, I'm in the oil trades, my customers are oil majors, highly regulated, high standards we have to meet. So we're very serious about maintaining our environmental credentials. And I think that's also very important. But yes, we can always do more. And we can have targets, we can have measures, and we can look at a range of initiatives. And I think that's the key area that we want to focus on. I also want to pick up on what Kitak Lim had said this morning. And I've just made a note that IMO is the United Nations specialized agency with responsibility for the safety and security of shipping and the prevention of marine pollution by ships. And in the context of what Kitak Lim was saying is that the world is watching, and the world is watching IMO, then the IMO has to make sure that it provides a serious, strong, clear leadership for the industry. And if that's got to be the focal point of how we drive all of our initiatives forward, and providing that leadership with all stakeholders. Coming back to the point that we are business people, we are ship operators, ship owners. We're used to a structured approach. That's how we manage our business. So therefore, if we are going to drive an agenda forward that is meaningful, then we need to have a clear strategy and we need to have a strategic approach. And that's why I think there has been disappointment coming out of MEPC 71, that there was failure to reach a consensus on a clear strategy or a strategy framework. And in that context, again, wearing one of my other hats as chair of the Bahamas Shipowners, and therefore having a close relationship, very close relationship with Bahamas Flag State, I'm very pleased and very proud that they've put forward a paper in co-sponsorship with ICS, which is my third hat, that just to get them all in there. But the thing is that, and wherever we are in the industry, that's the reason why I'm explaining this, we all have a part to play and we're all active in this. We want to be seen to be progressive. We're not trying to sit and hide away and put our head in the sand. We're trying to be progressive with this in a responsible way. And therefore, I'm very pleased and proud, as I say, that Bahamas and ICS have put forward a paper which is outlining a vision and going somewhere to drafting a detailed strategy. And that's got to be the first step. And although that's been opposed to by other member states of previous MEPC, that has to be taken up at the next one. As I say, we want to drive this forward. I mean, as part of my shipping association activities, we had a meeting earlier this summer with the European Commission. And the sense I got from that meeting is that Now, that, as MEPC 71 perhaps didn't get to where they would like it to have gone, if there's these intersessional meetings that take place in, I think it's October and February, then there's a lot of work has to be done there to be ready for MEPC 72 in April. And therefore what I'm saying is, yes, ship owners, ship operators, shipping industry has to step up, but so do the others. IMO must step up, and the legislators must step up, and we have to do this in unison. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Next, John.
Well, good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to contribute. Well, I guess as you can imagine, I have probably have a slightly different take on some of these issues. I'm not going to go over the impacts of climate change that we're already feeling, the likely impacts that are not very far down the road. This is a hugely serious issue, really on a completely different scale to anything that the IMO or the shipping industry has had to deal with before. So it is a huge challenge, and one that's going to require everyone involved to lift their game significantly. The threat, of course, is greater for some than others. I think anybody who sat at the IMO and listened to the late Tony de Brum talk about the impact of climate change on Pacific small island states couldn't help but be moved. And indeed, I think that has injected an additional urgency into the process at IMO, and I think it's also, it's also influenced the way ICS now looks at this issue, and I think that's very welcome. And I think, there is real engagement and there is real understanding of the scale of the problem. There's also, of course, a lot of talk about the need for a truly ambitious response, and of course this is true. To protect places like the Marshall Islands, 2 degrees isn't our target. It's 1.5 degrees. And what that means in practical terms for the shipping industry, if its share of emissions remains much the same as it is now, what that means in practical terms is decarbonisation, not at the end of this century, not, somewhere in the middle of the second half of this century, not even at 2050. What 1.5 would mean in those circumstances is decarbonisation sometime in the next 25, 30 years. Not even the lifespan of a new ship. So I think when we're talking about ambition, we have to keep absolutely focused on that point. My concern, having sat through much of what goes on at the IMO on this issue, and indeed having read and looked at the International Chamber of Shipping's response to that, my concern is that the headline concern seems to be there. There is an acceptance of the problem. There is talk about the need for a truly ambitious strategy. But, then there's just too many ifs and too many buts. It's got to be an ambitious strategy, but there isn't going to be any cap on emissions. It's got to be an ambitious strategy, but we don't want any legally binding goal. We want it to be aspirational. We don't want any market-based measures. Well, if we're going to have one, then maybe we can have a levy. Well, levy. Is that going to drive down emissions? Is that going to get us to 1.5 degrees? I don't think so. Other MBMs with caps, they have a role to play. A levy, no cap? I don't think so. There's, when you read ICS papers, there is this kind of headline concern, and then there is a narrowing of all of the options, all of the things that are ruled out and that we don't want and we don't like. And what do you end up with? Do you end up with something that's going to deliver a solution to climate, or to the shipping industry's share of the solution to climate change? I don't think it is. And I think there's a cautionary tale from the past, because, when I look at a lot of what's being said and written by the industry on this particular issue now and on the strategy, it reminds me a little bit of the EEDI. Now I know that you all like the EDI, and actually we would like the EDI, or we'd like it more if it had some really biting, stringent requirements that actually drove innovation and development, but it doesn't, and it hasn't ever had. You know, the EDI is lauded as a fantastic outcome, the first the first global greenhouse gas measure and all of that. But you know, in 2015 there were ships being built that were EDI ships and non-EDI ships. There's no difference in the efficiency. You know, economics have driven recent changes in the efficiency of new ships. And if we look back historically, back to the 1950s, we see a pattern of rising and falling efficiency of new ship design following, you know, market developments. So let's not kid ourselves. The EDI had a gerrymandered baseline and it had extremely poor levels of ambition, and it's not driving improvements in the energy efficiency of new ships. It could do with reform, and the IMO is looking at this, but I mean, sadly, too slowly. So, you know, my concern about the greenhouse gas strategy is that if you don't keep focused on the target and you don't make sure that the level of ambition and the goals are real and fit where you're trying to get to, the danger is you end up with another EDI where, you know, it may look good on paper, but has it actually done anything? And I don't think it has. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, John. And finally, Magda.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you to ICS for inviting me to speak at this panel. I think the question, Gabrielle, you want to ask was for this introduction, looking more into what could or should be the level of ambition on the part of IMO to actually deal effectively with CO2 emissions reduction. And I do have to recall that we are in a post-Paris Agreement environment and reality, and I think we should not forget that the change that was brought to the global discussions about climate change with the Paris Agreement has been immense, and that change has also been brought to the shipping world, if I can say at large, including international organizations like IMO, including us at the European Union level, but also the shipping industry. And that I take as a very positive sign. And I said it in private meetings, and I'm happy to repeat it here, that the submission by ICS to MEPC 71 was a very, very welcome development, because I think it was one of the first occasions when actually the International Chamber of Shipping spoke so openly about the need to do something to address the problem of global emissions. The global pathway for reducing emissions does not necessarily have to follow the Paris Agreement one, but on the other hand, I think there are two elements that need to be seriously taken into account, and they need to be reflected very clearly and very strongly in whatever will be the strategy to deal with emissions. And I very much hope that nobody in this room would question that. And the first element is that the emissions have to start declining soon. And the second one is that in the second half of the century, they need to be reduced towards zero. It's an extremely difficult task, and you've heard from the second and the third John, a lot of, it's not the order of importance, it's the order of speaking, just to be very clear. Oh, sorry, the first and the second John, sorry, first and the second, sorry. I just took Sveinung as being the first John. Okay, I start again. So you heard from the first and second John a lot of words why there are issues that have to be looked at seriously. But at the same time, and here I totally agree with the third John, we need to. Yeah, that's not getting me anywhere with the first, second, and third John at this table. I need to rethink it seriously. Anyway. To come back to a very, very serious topic for that panel, I actually fully agree that we have to make sure that that strategy that will be developed first or agreed upon first in April next year is a meaningful one. We hear that word meaningful right and left from everybody. I'm just not sure whether we mean the same when we say meaningful. And I think this is going to be the biggest challenge for the next 6 to 8 months to first make sure that we understand the same words in the same way, but then also that we put meaning to those words, because otherwise we will end up with a document that will not help. And I mean the word help seriously, because I think for the industry to be ready, and here, John Lyras, you're right, the industry needs to know what technologies we are talking about, what technologies are possible. But for the industry to be ready and to have time to prepare, you need to know what it is that you're preparing for. And just having a statement that we need a range of measures that will work towards, without specifying what it is that we are talking about and what those measures will be and when they come up, it will actually not be helpful to the industry, because you need to have concrete elements in that strategy. Secretary Alim talk a lot about the miracles cooperation on various levels. I always believe that if there is cooperation, miracles happen. And for me, the next 8 months are an unprecedented opportunity for all of us to actually get our act together and do something, because it is not just a question of credibility of various international institutions, of European Commission, of the shipping industry. It's also the credibility of International Maritime Organization as a strong and powerful institution that can steer the shipping world into a more sustainable and greener future.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I'm going to come straight back to you, Sveinung, if I may. There were some statements of commitment, but also I'm not going to say the Johns. John Mags, thank you for the challenge there. So the stated ambitious target is holding emissions at 2008 levels and then finding some percentage by which to reduce them by 2050. Is it enough, bearing in mind what John Mags has said? You're chair of the IMO working group, so you're our guy on the ground.
Well, I think there are several answers to your question. One, is it enough? I think that is, let's say, for the total global community, are we doing enough in order to respond to climate change? When it comes to are we doing enough within shipping, I think I will have two comments. One is the importance of early action compared to the importance of later action. So early minor, meaning what we can do now, being a minor change, is just as important as the late and major change. In this discussion, of course, it's very important to discuss the large ambition, the real future action. But if you don't take the steps we can do right now, we will fail with the late ambition as well. So whether or not it is enough, it's difficult to say. Allow me to give an example. Teekay, you are now have on order 2 shuttle tankers. I guess it's which are being built.
I hear where you're going with this.
Which are being built, which will cut emissions 40%. Yes, they will cut emission by 40%. Some will say it's not enough, but you could have, let's say, have on order just the regular ship without these cuts. Meaning that action is just as important in order to succeed as the major change with the energy system, decarbonization into the long future. So, so that is my first response. Is it enough or is it not enough? It's difficult for me to be the judge of that. The other thing I would say, and also listening to the other comments, is that there are always concerns when you need to take a change. So in order to do this change, there will be a lot of challenges, but do not allow concerns with the minor challenges to lead us to fail to succeed on the major challenge. I think that is what we are all struggling with, and needing, let's say, to come to a better common understanding of. So I will not be the judge of, let's say, is it enough or not. I would say it is at least now enough to be on the track.
I can see, I suppose, an analogy with the Paris Agreement, in that there was a very ambitious target set, but also the individual nationally determining contributions don't add up to that target. And so the argument there was, we ratchet up, we have to start somewhere. And I can see an analogy there, but it's sort of your job to decide if it's enough, really, isn't it?
No. No, I think my task is to be a facilitator, so the member states, in cooperation with the wider community, also the NGOs, can come to the agreement. I'm just there to assist.
Okay. So well, then let me come to you, John Adams, because with your ICS hat on. So it's, in a way, it's got to be somebody's job to decide if it's enough. And with the ICS recommendations, that's a combination of, can the industry handle it, and is it going to achieve the objective? So from your discussions and the input that you've given into the IMO, what do you think about the level of ambition?
I think a couple of things to bear in mind here. I think that we can take the extreme points of view. I think, as Sveinung has tried to articulate, is a great point. That there are immediate steps that are underway, things which are happening. I think John on my left here is on the other extreme of being quite dismissive, I think, in some of the initiatives that are taken, and I think that's not helpful to the discussion. I think that what Magda is saying about it being a collective getting our act together, and that's where I am. And I think it's this positive look at a collectively getting our act together and getting support from all NGOs who work with us in trying to do this. I think what I would say about ICS's role in this, and I think it's an important point to bear in mind, it's a large industry, many operators, many sectors, and I think from where we started on this, certainly over a year ago, in terms of engaging with all the membership, getting to the point where we could distill it down to make a recommendation, and it's not just ICS, it's the other round table, if you like, BIMCO and Intertanko and Intercargo, to get together and try and get this one consensus to push that forward. I think I need people to just understand, and those of you who are running committees or wherever will understand that it takes a long time to get that discussion and progress that dialogue to the point where you can polish it into a paper. And I think we've seen that, and I say that in great mitigation to the IMO as well, that probably that's a mitigating factor for MEPC 71, just in a practical way. But I think coming out of that, and as we've now identified over this next 8 months, there's a clear delivery that must be done to be ready for that. And I know that the ICS paper, going to have the consensus of the other roundtable partners, will be looking at so-called aspirational goals. Some I think are very meaningful. Some I think that do point a direction and support what Sveinung again is saying. And I think these measures, it'll be judged whether they're enough, but I think that they are at least setting out something I think is very progressive and something I think is a stretched target for us to go after and something we can deliver on. We don't want to be in a position of, shall I say, making statements and goals like other industry sectors have done, and they've sounded very good, and they've been put out in the public domain, but I don't think there's any real conviction behind them. We will put out measures which I think are very real and something that we will take very serious to deliver on. The other footnote I would say about this early and medium term is, if we start talking about 2035, 2050, and to be able to do things by then, in terms of, when we think of this in the context of the life of the planet, if we can at least get measures in these 10 and 20 years, and by the middle of this century, I think these are realistic goals to go after.
Thank you. John Lyras, you talked about the importance of trust and collaboration, and said we don't want confrontation, we want cooperation. But that trust has to extend not just within the ICS members, but also with NGOs and all the rest of the world that's watching, right?
Yes.
So what do you think about the impression that's being given by the aspirational goals that are coming out?
Well, I think I'm picking up from what John on my immediate left said. It's we could as an industry go for the rhetoric and say, we're going to reduce emissions from ships to zero by 2060. And then John, not my immediate left next, he says, well, how are you going to do it? So we have opted, and it's also because we're in many ways a traditional industry. I mean, seafaring is the oldest profession, or almost. We have always opted for telling people, you know, a spade's a spade, how things are. So why are we being pressed to set a target or to be very specific about what the percentage is and by when? What's the point of this? I can't understand it. I disagree with John on John Maggs that the EDI is not efficient. The EDI may have been easy to comply with in 2015. It's not going to be easy to comply with in 2020 because every 5 years it has to be 10% more efficient, the ships that are going to be built. So we don't ignore facts in our industry, and we don't want to promote a false picture. We want people to recognize the facts. Now, as John says, if we haven't been very good at doing this, then that's our fault and we should do it better. But let me give you a specific example. I'm a ship owner. I want the most fuel-efficient ship that exists today when I'm going to order a ship. Where do I order the ship? In the Far East. I'm a Western ship owner, I'm a Greek, and if I'm going to operate a bulk carrier, which I do, or a tanker, I have to build it in China or in Japan or in Korea. So it's the shipyard that has to comply with the EDI. And I, as the owner, have to make sure that it's in compliance. I also have to make sure that the ship is in compliance with the other environmental regulations that are already in force. Ballast water management, you name it, the Hong Kong Convention that's coming along, and being prepared for that. So therefore, how am I going to convince, as the owner of a small company, the shipyard to come up with revolutionary technologies?
Isn't that why you need an ambitious target, though? You said you don't understand why anyone would ask for targets.
Well, it's not up to me to have the ambitious target. It's not up to the industry alone. You know, what I'm saying is that here, shipping is an industry that doesn't involve ship owners alone. It involves shipyards, it involves classification societies, it involves financing, banks, the people who allow you to build ships, and it involves regulators. You know, if regulators don't understand the facts about the business, then they're not going to be producing good regulation. Sure. So going back to the trust and cooperation thing, this is what we need. I don't think that what's your target, when are you going to reduce by what percentage is the right way to go. It's not so simple. I'm sorry. It's not so simple. And one last comment, to be a bit sort of provocative. If we really want to reduce CO2 emissions to zero today, we can do it in two ways. We can stop trading, or we can go back to sail. Well, no, we haven't got the logo there, but we've kept the sail in our logo. And I'm all for it. Let's go back to sail.
I must say that the romantic in me loves that idea, but I'm not sure that the consumer in me would like it quite so much. Magda, do you think we need targets?
Yes, we absolutely do need targets, and we need targets set in a way that they are realistic, and that also they are actually convincing. I think putting targets that actually make it business as usual will not do the trick. And again, John, Lyras, what you said, I can only fully sign up to that. Yes, you need assurances, you need clarity, what technologies are available. But if we are to do something, and you know, I'm a linguist by education, so I love playing with words. The words in, by, within, you can change the whole sentence by changing one word. But if we want reducing CO2 emissions to zero by within in the second half of this century, make your pick, we have to know now what we are going to do. it won't help to say we'll decide in 2035 that something will happen. And that is, I think, the sense of pressure that I believe we need to have even more for the intersessional in October, because we really we have to get down to discussing nitty-gritty details of what's going to be in the strategy. I know it's an initial strategy, and I'm not quite sure I fully understand the meaning of that word, but actually the way I read it is it's the strategy that can then be a bit fine-tuned and updated in view of developments and new data coming up and information being gathered. But this is going to be the strategy that will be the benchmark against which we'll be judging whether we are delivering on Paris Agreement target. And sorry to repeat myself, but I had discussions with the shipping industry on many interesting environmental issues such as low sulfur, and I always heard a lot about legal certainty. To have legal certainty as quickly as possible, let's get to that legal certainty as quickly as possible.
Sure. So, John?
Well, just to respond very briefly to the other Johns. I mean, the reason what's coming out of my mouth sounds a little bit different to what you're used to hearing is because, I don't live in a shipping industry bubble. I spend quite a lot of time, interacting with it, but, I'm not coming at it from that perspective. And to be quite frank, I'm not sure I'd want to be a ship owner at this particular time with what has to happen in the next 20 years. So, you have my sympathies, but don't expect me to pretend that the job is going to be a smaller one than it really is. Why do we need targets? Well, we need more than targets. First of all, we need is a crystal clear, unequivocal, undodgeable signal to everybody involved in the shipping industry, the owners, the designers, the builders, there must be hundreds of other, associated trades. We need a crystal clear, unequivocal signal that in the next 15 to 20 years, we float a zero emission, large cargo vessel, and that becomes the norm. Now, do we get that unequivocal, crystal clear, unambiguous signal by agreeing a weak aspirational target with no cap and no this and no that, and we don't, the answer is no, we don't. That's why we need a target, and that's why we need something, very, very, it needs to be, quite what the legal framing of it is, I think, is open. I think using the word aspirational is just asking for trouble. Nobody's going to take that seriously. And what happens then? People, the industry is going, well, it's going to be a little bit like the sulfur. Okay, we've got that. We're going to get that extra 5 years. We don't really have to worry about this. Just business as usual. That's the danger. We need quite how it's formed. The detail of it, I'm not sure, but I know some things that it can't include, and it's using words like aspirational. We need something very, very clear that describes the scale of the problem, the urgency, and the fact that we really do have to make a massive change in the way business is done in the shipping industry in quite a short period of time. That's why targets are important, and that's why the whole issue about whether or not these things are binding or not. And I think there are two ways of looking at this. I mean, there's concern about, well, if we agree to something and then we can't do it, well, we look silly, we get criticised. If what you commit to is the logical requirement of where you want to go in terms of emissions reductions, if you commit to that, and you do everything you possibly can as an industry to get you there in the next 20 years, and you fail for some reason, nobody is going to hold that against you. If the attempt is a genuine one and you're doing it for the right reasons, that's fine. So stop worrying about that. I mean, and I would also say, from a legal point of view and from the IMO, there's lots of worry about, not having a legally, not having a cap, not having something legally binding. The IMO is kind of sovereign in these matters. So, it can set a target, now. If in 10 years' time it's clearly there's problems, it can play around with. It's all that option is always open to adjust and to fine tune. But if at the very beginning you start out without any real ambition, without any real urgency, without any real commitment, well then I think you're just setting yourself up for a fall.
Sure.
So
Thank you. Pia Berglund from the Swedish Shipowner, but also used to be a legislator for 50 years in IMO, so I have both hats on. Not John, but still 2 hats. The question is for John Max. Your first intervention, you said that most energy efficiency has been driven by commercial interest, as if that was a bad thing. Isn't that the best thing, if all energy efficiency is driven by commercial reasons? Because true sustainability also includes an economic viability leg. And I think that's what we should really achieve, to get the ship owners on board. And I represent also ship owners with sail now. So, I mean, you're laughing about it, but we have 2 now, the first sails coming out. I have LNG, batteries, methanol, even one trying to sail to go on water. So you're laughing about it, but I think what are you doing to promote also the ones that are so far ahead of you, the IMO legislation? What is being done to achieve that? Because we need that development and innovation. And what is your view on that? Because it seems like it was almost a bad thing. I think it's a good thing.
Go.
Yeah. Well, you know, when the market conditions are such that they're motivating and you know, driving the development and the launching of more efficient ships, they're good. The problem is, you know, when the market turns against that kind of development, and we've seen this in the past where, you know, believe it or not, it made commercial sense. You know, certain market circumstances, it made commercial sense to build, you know, inefficient ships. Those ships got built, and that's just that's part of the historical record. So, you know, the market producing, you know, a nice outcome, of course, is good, but it doesn't always do that, which is why we need regulation. And at the moment, you know, we had a study out earlier in the year. Now it's showing the very first signs that the average design efficiency of new ships hitting the world's fleet is starting to fall. Now, of course, it's got a long way to fall before it has a problem with the EDI, because the EDI requirements are so weak and the baseline was so poorly chosen. But we're seeing signs of average design efficiency falling. Now, you know, that may be a blip. You know, we'll have to wait and see for another year's worth of data. But that, you know, so that tells you that you can't always rely on the market to increase the efficiency of the fleet. Of course, when it does, I'm, you know, as happy as anybody, obviously.
Sveinung.
Okay, thank you. Allow me to pick up on a couple of points, because I think we are discussing many things at the moment. One is why regulate, and one is what do we need at the IMO, etc. I think what is important to understand is whatever we agree upon is an agreement between member states. It's global democracy. And the global democracy has decided to respond properly to climate change. That is clear, and the willingness to go that route is firm. So it is the same states meeting at the IMO deciding whether or not to do more on international shipping. And then there are various ways to do this. And the member states may decide to do nothing, and the EU may decide to do nothing, and that is a political decision. Then we leave shipping alone. However, at this point, I think it is unlikely for that to happen. And when member states decide upon things, I think it is very important to understand that the consequences of climate change and the capacities of states and the consequences of doing things varies very much around the world. It is different in Bangladesh, Malaysia, Germany, Norway, Chile, wherever. And that is what is a little bit complicating, especially on a problem like climate change, which is so interferes so much with the economy. So I think it's very important to understand this picture as we go forward. It is an agreement between member states, and we have to give it time in order to adjust so everybody can come along to the changes needed, because there will be changes. Then, in order to create the pathway forward, also clearly, yes, very much is about words. Words, ambition, targets, etc. In order to actually get global agreement, we need to define an approach which can be accepted in all states. That is there in any negotiation, not as an and it is a real thing. It is a real thing. And it will happen at the IMO as well. That is why actually we went from CO2 to energy efficiency when we did that at the IMO, simply because it was impossible for so many states to do anything on CO2 at that time. Okay, let's go forward on energy efficiency. And that is why we will define the further way with the, let's say, solution which can be accepted all around the world. It is not only one state regulating shipping, it is the global community, global democracy coming to agreement on whether or not to doing anything about shipping and how to do it. And regulation is, nobody wants regulation to punish industry. Nobody wants regulations to punish industry. It is the insurance of, then at the IMO, the global democracy to achieve the main targets, to achieve the main target on climate change. And at this moment, there are actions being taken within the countries as a follow-up of the Paris Agreement. At this moment, they are preparing further preparing the actions on international aviation. And at this moment, we are preparing the further action on international shipping. I think we are going in one direction, and I think to stop that flow is impossible if you take the global challenges seriously, if you take the global democracy seriously. And I think at this moment, the momentum is growing, and we will find, and I totally agree, going into the details, clearly there are problems establishing regulation. There are problems with the EDI. There are problems when it comes to operation of ships. It is not always fair. And what is important is to create the willingness to go into solving those problems so we minimize them. So that is the importance. And that is what we need to facilitate at the IMO, to create that momentum so it can be accepted in China, in Chile, in Norway, in Greece, wherever, so we can have the flow coming.
Sure. John.
Gabrielle, can I?
Of course.
Yes, I think I'm going to be a bit provocative.
You amaze me.
One of the reasons why, first of all, the IMO is an intergovernmental agency. It's not a shipowners agency, you know, and so it's the governments, has been explained here, that have to agree. They're the same governments that participate in UNFCCC. So why is the IMO perceived to be dragging its feet, whereas the UNFCCC is the sort of pioneer? It's not that way. They're not binding commitments in the UNFCCC either. And one of the reasons I believe that in the IMO we have difficulty getting the member state, the governments, to agree, is because, as I said at the beginning, shipping provides a vital service to all nations, whether they're developing or whether they're developed, or whether they're threatened by climate change more or less. And we all know the population is growing. I think it's going to be 50% more than the 7.5 billion it is today in 2010. So the governments want to, first of all, secure that they're going to be able to get what they need, because shipping ships what people need as well as what people want, and mainly what people need. 80% of ton miles is what nations need: raw materials, energy, and foodstuffs, essentials. And they're going to be needing them because of the population growth in the future. So therefore, trade is going to expand. We have to take these facts into account. They're facts. They're not sort of theories. And for instance, in the EU, to be provocative, 76% of energy is still fossil fuels in the EU. So who are we to preach the world? How do we have targets in the EU for this 76% fossil fuel dependence, which, mind you, is 50% in households? 50% of households in Europe still rely on fossil fuels for their energy.
Okay.
So where are the commitments there, the legally binding commitments?
I think this is something that we should certainly come back to, but we have two questions. So, Peter.
Peter Hinchliffe from ICS. I'd like to take Sveinung and Magda back to the IMO process and make 2 points which I hope will demonstrate that there is a real sense of urgency in the industry. And the first point is that the IMO has undertaken to deliver the strategy by the end of next year. That gives us rather less than 3 weeks of working time, and I'd be very interested to hear how you think you're going to deliver on that and for Magda's comments. And the second point is that, as Sveinung knows, I'm quite concerned about the concentration on measures in the strategy, because I think there's a real danger that having a list of measures, no matter how much it's couched in IMO language about being not limited to, could actually be a real disincentive to innovation.
Okay, thanks. Magda?
Thank you. I think the sense of urgency is something that we all agree to, and the fact that we have to. I always hesitate whether I should use the word "we" here in this context, but the fact that the next intersessional is only happening in a month from now is actually something that really calls on everybody to work very hard. And that's why what I started by saying, we need to. The time between the end of October and April next year is something that is actually no time at all if we look at the IMO process and how complicated it is and how many different actors have to be involved and how difficult it is to discuss those topics with many of the IMO member states for reasons which I understand and everybody in this room understands. And John Lyras, you're right. For many countries, the approach to shipping is very different than for countries that are better off and have more innovative or more modernized ship owning companies in their countries. But I think the fact of urgency should not prevent us from saying that yes, we can do it, because again, we don't have any other choice. And if that doesn't happen at an international level, then inevitably sooner or later regional solutions will start kicking in. And also, if the solution at the international level is not a functioning one or a convincing one, that can also lead to regional solutions. We've seen it for other IMO regulations where delays or decisions to delay implementation lead actually to actions being taken up at different parts of the globe.
Sveinung?
Thank you. Allow me to respond to the two questions by Peter. First, I have to say I'm optimistic when it comes to our ability to deliver what is we are expected to deliver, meaning the IMO has decided to adopt an initial strategy in 2018, and I have firm belief that we will do so. And yes, we have 3 weeks to work on, and I think that is the sufficient time available. So. And also, one of the reasons I'm saying optimistic on that one, and that I'm not afraid of further delay, is that now the, call it, downside of a delay is quite huge. And I think that is the attitude of most member states, that a downside of a non-delivery by 2018 is quite huge. So, and I'm also optimistic when it comes to the content of the strategy, because I can see there is willingness among member states and also of the participants from the NGO in order to have a real meaningful strategy. Then to your second questions about the issue of measures, of course, there is a lot of discussion on that, but actually the member states have agreed in the mandate for our work, and that is the roadmap we agreed upon at MEPC 70, that in spring 2018, MEPC 72, when we should adopt the initial strategy, and it specifically mentioned that should include, inter alia, a list of candidate short, mid and long-term further measures with possible timelines to be revised as appropriate as additional information becomes available. and that issue, meaning that we have a specific task to include that and respond to that, that is the answer to your question. Yeah, simple as that.
John Adams first. What do you think about this question of market-based measures?
A couple of things on that. To answer that question and make another general point is that I think it's this provocative aspect to it is one thing. This isn't a point-scoring exercise. This is more important than that. I think that the other aspect to this is that it's. I don't want it. It shouldn't. It's important. It's something we're all passionate about. But I don't want it to be an emotive discussion that deteriorates the quality of the discussion. I think we've got to be pragmatic more than anything else and be realistic in looking at this. I think that I think in terms of market-based measures, I think that in the same way as looking at targets, and I don't want to get into the semantics. I know what you're saying about aspirational. But if I was writing a proposal for my company and I put in these are the goals for next year, and maybe next year I have a stretch goal or an aspirational goal, I could frame that in a positive way. And not something that is just meant to be a nice word, but something that would be realistic in terms of something that might be achievable also. So I think I just want to put some context around how we would describe those. In the same way, when we come to look at market-based measures, then I believe that becomes important for the shipping industry to again be part of the agenda, driving the agenda, coming up with market-based measures that make sense, something that is applicable. I think that, again, I don't want to get bogged down in the semantics, but the thing is, having something undodgeable, I think is the word you used, John, is that it's something that we're used to in shipping. We're one of the most highly regulated industries that there is. We're constantly audited, we're constantly vetted, we're constantly being inspected. All our standards are undodgeable. So I think that anything we look at having implemented would have to fit that description. So therefore, I would see it that whatever measures we put in place, and even with market-based measures, these are market-based measures that make sense, that they would present a level playing field. It would be better if they weren't regionally driven. That would also suggest that they were out of control and couldn't be managed as easily. So I think it could be something that would have to be universal, unilateral, if you like, that could be applied across the industry and all sectors. And that's the type of market-based measure we would want to look for.
Sure, thanks. John?
Well, not on the MBM point, but on Peter's point about measures during the discussions. And I think also on Sveinung's point from a little bit earlier, where he said, you know, emissions in the short term are really important as well. And certainly, you know, that's our feeling. We have this very, very big task of decarbonising in the medium to longer term. But, you know, we have a carbon budget that we're trying to operate within. So, you know, if we can reduce emissions in the short term, you know, that stretches our budget further into the future, gives us a bit more time for the R&D that's needed for this zero emission ship that's going to have to, at some point, replace the ships that we're using now. So, you know, deep cuts in the short term are necessary and very valuable, not just in themselves, but because of this longer term perspective. So, you know, we need measures at the initial strategy stage that speak to cutting emissions, you know, deeply in the short term. So I think it's, you know, we really do need measures in there. And I think, you know, actually, you know, we need to be teeing up the kind of mechanisms and processes that will see the R&D and see the development stuff in the medium to long. We need to be teeing those up early on as well. But we definitely need to be looking at, you know, how we can, between 2018 and 2023, have a big impact on emissions from ships. You know, one of the issues at the last greenhouse gas intersessional and MEPC that you know was that attracted a lot of interest was speed. The Clean Shipping Coalition and Seas at Risk have done a lot of work on this. We've got another study coming out in time for the next greenhouse gas intersessional. We think there's enormous potential there to bring emissions down deeply in the short term. In fact, we would challenge you to try and come up with any other possibility for bringing emissions down deeply in the short term that's as effective. So, you know, that's something that needs to be looked at and considered seriously by the IMO. It's also something that I didn't really notice, you know, an awful lot of support from ICS for when it was raised at IMO. But I know some elements within the shipping industry, some parts of the world look more favourably upon the possibilities of speed as a mitigator than others. And anyway, but you know, deep cuts in the short term absolutely essential for peaking emissions. And buying time for R&D, and we need to look at things like speed when we're doing this. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a couple of people waiting for questions, and we're slightly running out of time, but I would like to get to all of them. So what I'm going to say is, can we take all these three questions together, and then we'll come back to the panel. So you've been very patient.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Jan Hoffmann from UNCTAD in Geneva. I like economic incentives. Is it on, the microphone?
Yes.
Yes.
And I like the way IMO is financed, actually, because in the end it is the ship owners, and through the ship owners it's then the user who pays. The Panama, Liberia, and Marshall Islands pay 1/3 of IMO. My question is more to Sveinung and Magda, I guess, to the public sector, to the IMO members. Would it not make sense that this membership fee, let's call it this way, to IMO, were not only proportional to the tonnage, but proportional to the CO2 emissions of the fleets? Now, I have to be very careful here. I'm working for a UN agency in Geneva, and it's not that one UN agency makes a suggestion to another UN agency. It's just my personal thinking. And I used to be IMO staff, actually, 22 years ago, and at that time I discussed the concept of internalization of externalities, and the colleagues at that time who were much older than me, and they discussed, and they ended up discussing the internationalization of externalities, which was not my intention. So it's one more attempt to internalize externalities.
Sure, thank you. And then?
Thank you very much. It's done. Perfect. My name is Elena Antoniadou from IMCA, the Marine Contractors Association. So I would like to go back to the question, are we doing enough? So I think the NGOs like the Clean Shipping Coalition, ICS, IMCA, as well as the IMO chairs of the working groups may do as much as they can regarding regulatory influencing and technical support. However, at the end of the day, it's the call of the countries which have the voting rights in the IMO process. So the same EU countries which supported the roadmap on GHG emissions at MEPC in October 2016 were behind the ultimatum that was given by the European Parliament 2 months after, in December, when they suggested that shipping should be included in the ETS if the IMO does not reach global deal by 2021. This mandate may be inconsistent with the IMO roadmap, according to which the decision-making will start in spring 2022. So I guess my question is, what the EU means by global deal at IMO by 2021. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then Emanuele?
The business is delivering because since 2008 we had a significant reduction of emissions whilst the sea trade has grown. And we have the two things happening, which I think is the first time in the industry. And one thing that I want to disagree with John Magda is that we never, as ship owners or entrepreneurs, would ever build inefficient vessel. There is no time that we would consider to make an investment in what it is. It's only the time and the development of technology or other constraint. For instance, the Panama Canal makes inefficient certain ships, but those ships then, this is a risk that of course the entrepreneur is taking, but those vessels have been scrapped very early, some of them even when they were only 11 or 12 years old, because they became inefficient because of the Panama Canal. But when we make the decision of making the investment, we always make the decision to invest in the best possible ships, and of course since the cost of fuel is the biggest cost that we are having in managing the ships, of course we take a lot of care in finding and trying to build the ship with the best environmental records and, of course, the best energy saving. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. So, 3 questions. A proposal about membership being proportional to CO2 as well as tonnage. A question which I think is particularly for Magda about the ETS, and this comment about the shipping industry as entrepreneurs always going for the most efficient ships. So, who wants to start with which of those?
Can I start?
Please.
Because I think with the first question, it will be obvious that I will dodge it. European Commission is not member of IMO, so I will not comment on the membership fee. That's the easy one.
I think I might come back to you on that.
Don't. I still won't answer. Thank you for the question on the European Parliament vote on including shipping in emission trading scheme. I hate to disagree with those who ask me a question, but I have to disagree with what you said only because it was indeed a vote of the European Parliament. Well, decisions in the IMO are taken by the government, but let me restate it again. We, as the European Commission, we didn't include the proposal to have shipping in the emission trading scheme. Once we put the proposal on the table, then it goes into a full-fledged political process. On the one hand, you have the national governments. On the other hand, you have the European Parliament. Political processes have their own pace and their own turns and developments. Let me put it like that. The way I read the statement by the European Parliament is to put a sense of urgency into the IMO process, to clearly state, yes, there is an international process going on, and for the European Commission, this has always been, and it continues to be, the preferred solution for shipping. It's a global business. We need a global way forward. But the way I read the European Parliament is simply saying, if there is no progress, then start working in 2021 to be ready with the proposal in 2023. In spite of sometimes discussions and maybe not full alignment on this side of the table, I actually strongly believe that what will come out of MEPC in April will be a convincing, meaningful and comprehensive strategy that will be read as such, and that will be sufficient to explain to those who are asking for a global, for a regional solution, that we don't need it, that IMO has delivered, and we can just follow and implement the IMO strategy fully.
Great, thank you. Who wants to tackle another one?
Yeah.
Okay, John, go.
Yeah, I mean, I think don't want to take the whole design efficiency through history thing too far, but I mean, my observations are based on actually the work that was done preparing for the EDI. There was no EDI calculation until a few years ago, so when you look at the historical design efficiency, you use something called the efficiency indicator value, which was what the calculation that was used to create the baselines for the EDI. And if you run that calculation for the ships built going back through to the 60s and 70s, you'll see quite extreme fluctuations in the design efficiency of those ships. So it is the case that through time the design efficiency of ships has gone up and down, and that tracks quite well with market conditions, leading to the conclusion that I made earlier that market conditions affect the choice of the efficiency of ships. One other point was your comments regarding reduction in greenhouse gas emissions since 2008. I'm keen to respond to this just because, of course, those reductions, in the face of recently at least increasing transport work, are the result of reductions in speed. So it's a clear indication of the potential for speed as a mitigator for CO2. It's not entirely the case, but a large part of that is to do with reduced speeds. Thank you.
Emanuele?
First question, unfortunately this index, it is different, should be different for different vessels. And during the span when you have made your exercise and your study, in different times have been built different types of vessels. So, and of course, also the index works differently if you're talking about a ro-ro, a ferry, a car carrier, or a container, or a bulker, and there are times where you build certain types of vessel because the market is requiring certain type of vessel, and there are times when, but of course, if the price of fuel is high, of course, the tendency, of course, and the necessity of being efficient is bigger, and we evaluate that more. But I think that the improvement has been, we had certain improvement all the time. I remember, you know, for instance, starting in my sector of car carrier, a vessel of 1,000 cars, the first vessel that I was managing was a vessel of 1,000 cars. And she consumed exactly like a vessel of 4,000 that we are using today. And now we are ordering vessel of 8,000 cars with the same consumption. So you can say that in the 40 years I have been in business, the vessels are 8 times more efficient. And this has happened all the time.
Okay.
Every 20 years we had a certain improvement.
Okay, thank you. We won't come back to that for the moment, but Sveinung.
Yeah, allow me to comment upon two things. One was the issue about the membership fee at the IMO. Interesting proposal. However, I would say, yeah, everything is possible, but I would say that such a proposal will have a long route. The most difficult thing you can discuss in the whole world is money, I think. But nothing is impossible, but it will be clearly a long route. Only response to that. Now, in relation to the other proposal, I think it is very important to observe the following, and that is also a general comment, let's say, on let's say investments in shipping, because every day investments are done in shipping and in the global economy. It happens every day. And what I would guess is that the interest to invest in green shipping, because in order to create green shipping, there is a need for investment. Clearly, there is a need for it. Nothing comes without investment, will grow. And if the IMO succeed to have more meaningful next steps, the interest to invest in green shipping will grow even more. So that I think is the anticipation that there will need. But clearly, there is a need to invest quite much in the change. It will not come for free, and there is various investments. Also, governments need to invest. Governments need to provide money for research and development. Money needs to be involved in a private-public partnership. Governments need to engage also in investments towards green shipping. By doing that, we may succeed. Yeah.
Okay, so we're almost out of time, and we still have more questions, which I'm afraid we don't have a chance to get to, which is confirming my initial comment about the level of passion and engagement in the room. So thank you very much for not disappointing me on that. Every time I work with shipping, it seems to get stronger. I have one last question that I'd like to put to each of you. With just short answers, just to see if it will help to project us. And that's we've talked about the ambition. We've talked about targets. We've talked about market-based measures. And we talked about the difference between something to be done immediately now and something to look for the longer term. The one thing that I feel like we've missed is just this question that you just brought up, Sveinung, which is investment in new fuels, new ships, new ways of doing this in the future that don't exist now and that we're going to need. And so whether that's different kinds of fuels or fuel cells or what would it be, how will we get to that? What's it going to take to be able to get to that place where we can be floating that zero-emission ship at some point in the future? And if you can make it just a quick comment, that would be great.
Okay. How? Okay. First, to have energy ships is a quite huge change which need to happen, which involves several players. But without involvement of governments in either establishing frameworks and or incentives and involving with industry, it will not happen. So this is the most complex and most important issue in order to provide emission cuts, is to have the infrastructure and availability of low fossil fuels. That is, in order to give a short answer, that was as short as I could.
Okay, great, thank you. John?
Yes, as I said before, the fossil fuel dependence, not only of Europe but of the world economy, is very, very high. So I think the research that's going into alternative fuels now applies across the board. It's not just for shipping. You know, the problem with shipping is that it cannot adopt a lot of the alternative fuels that are being developed right now as readily as they can be adopted on land because of characteristics of ships' engines and of ships and their size, etc., etc. So we need to push this forward, and I think from the industry's point of view, we need to exactly see that there is research being done that focuses on the maritime industry and not just across the board.
Sure, thank you. John?
Yeah, I think just go to something that Sveinung was saying is that when we talk about investment, it's not just the building of the ship, whether it be a green shuttle or a mega-engined gas carrier. It's the research and development that goes into that, and that's where a lot of the money is having to be invested. And it's in that context, in that positive context, if there is a use of an MBM which can raise monies in some way where that research and development can do those things, and in terms of developing alternative fuels, then I think that would be the way forward. I want to just close with a final comment, if I may, which is the central theme or plank of what I'm saying today is that I'm reminded of a comment that was made yesterday in a meeting with the Consultative Shipping Group, and it is that the shipping say they're going to do something, but always with a but. And I think we've got to look at that in the context, which is, what are we saying but to? We're not saying, but we don't want to do anything, but we don't want to be measured, but we don't want any cost. What we're saying is that we want realistic targets, we want to deliver on those, we want a progressive industry, we want an effective IMO, we want an effective legislator, we want European Commission to be progressive, not just directing targets, but being part of the discussion that says, yeah, you'll need a strategy and actually contributing to that in a positive way. And the last thing I want to say is that we want to do the right thing as an industry. And I think that we want that to be understood. And as soon as we get to that point, all those buts, those second list of buts I gave are actually where the answers are. And then shipping will be seen as actually not part of the problem, but part of the solution.
Which it is.
Thank you. John?
Thank you. Well, and what's needed is that very clear signal that I talked about a bit earlier. So a very, very strong political pointer from the IMO. That means no ifs or buts. It means a target date that's at a point in the future which isn't so far away. We're talking about floating a zero emission ship. It needs a political signal that failure isn't really an option. That we've got to do this, and I think it needs, it's going to need, I think if you had a clear enough signal and the whole industry was knew and understood that it was something that had to be done, then I think the research and development funds would be a little easier to find, but that doesn't mean that government doesn't have a role in helping to facilitate that as well. But I think what I suppose what those points I've just made, what they sort of add up to is something a little bit more like a kind of moonshot mentality. This is a really big change, but we have to do it, and we have to do it quickly, and it's the job of politicians. And I hope I know the IMO is a very broad church with lots of different interests and lots of different capabilities. But I hope it can still rise to the occasion and send that unequivocal signal, because I think that's the only way that we'll get that zero emission ship floating in time.
Sure, thank you. Magda?
Thank you. I don't think there's much that I can add to what everybody has said already, but clearly without a long-term regulatory environment that will clearly point in that direction, there will not be enough concentration on the part of R&D to make things change faster. Of course, money is needed, but let's not deceive ourselves. There's never the match between money on the public side and money on the private side. There's no match at all. There will always be more money for R&I on the side of the industry. So it is only with having this regulatory framework to which the industry will sign up. That's the only way forward. But if I can just say one more thing, sort of as a closing statement from me, I just wanted to say that I've been thinking throughout this discussion that actually I don't think we would have had such a discussion 2 years ago in the ICS conference. So if I can take with all of us at this side of the table and with actually the things we are discussing and how we are discussing. So for me, it's a telltale sign that things are moving in the right direction. Sveinung, I don't envy you your work, but I look forward to what you will be achieving over the next 7 months. Oh, if I can make your life easier, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you. I'm not going to attempt to sum up the whole of that discussion. You're smart enough to sum it up for yourselves. There's a couple of things that I just want to pick out before we finish, and that's just a very interesting and rich. You stole my point. I was going to say that I don't think I would have heard that conversation 2 years ago, and I completely agree with you. And it's another really encouraging sign, I think, of a level of connection and understanding. I'm looking at things like the comments about aspirational or stretch targets, and I do think that's what happened in the Paris Agreement as well. The whole point was we have an aspirational target of 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees, but aspirational doesn't mean that we're not trying to make it. It's just that right now it's too hard to make the nationally determined contributions add up to it, but they're going to be ratcheted, and there's a similar analogy here. I would rather that we could say that we had strict targets that have been put in place 20 years ago, but this is a hard problem. And my research supervisor, when I was doing my PhD, whenever I went to him and said, it's hard, he'd say, if it was easy, it would already have been done. And I think that applies here as well. So, I think that's an important part of the story. I love this point about this is an industry that's used to undodgeable targets. This is not something that you're afraid of. And I really recognize that. And but I also like what you said, John Maggs, that demonstrating that the attempt is genuine and done for the right reasons is actually enough at the moment, and really promoting that sense, feeling it and showing it, I think is important. I think the other things that I wanted to comment on, just that there's a sense that right from the very beginning, these comments, we don't need confrontation, we need cooperation. And the shipping industry is a fascinating one because of so many entrepreneurial players, because there's so many small players, because there's so many interactions across different sectors. This general point applies to every sector that I work in, but it particularly applies to you. And you talked to us, Sveinung, about global democracy and within the IMO and within the ICS as well. But I think the thing that's going to be ringing in my ears, I think for the rest of the day and possibly for the rest of the week too, is Kitak mentioning miracles. Right at the very beginning, he said it's been miraculous so far. And we need miracles, and I don't mean miracles in a kind of soft, ridiculous sense. I mean realistic miracles, that's what we need. And Magda, you made this wonderful comment, which is what I'm going to close with now. If there is cooperation, you said, miracles happen. If there is cooperation, miracles happen. So that's what we need. That's what I hope we're going to get more of. And thank you very much for your attention.